Hello and welcome. My name is Pamela Kadakia, the Equity Project Manager at the CDE, and I want to thank you for joining us today. This is the third webinar in a series of ongoing webinars at as part of the CDE's Education to End Hate initiative. And this webinar, Understanding and Countering Islamophobia, is brought to you by the Islamic Networks Group. And we are very grateful to be addressing the topic of Islamophobia, particularly after what occurred in our nation last week. Before I introduce our speakers, here is Daniel Thigpen, our Director of Communications, to introduce Superintendent Tony Thurmond.
Hi, thank you, Pam, and welcome everyone who's joining us on Zoom and to our communities and Californians who are joining us on Facebook Live today. I'm proud to introduce our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, who has throughout his tenure as our state schools chief really looked for the multiple lanes and the multiple responsibilities we have to use education as the powerful lever for ending hate and providing pathways for healing and understanding and empowering our students to pursue the futures that they choose. We know that we have multiple lanes that we can do this, that we can do it through curriculum, we can do it through school climate, and we can do it through educators like yourselves who are showing up to learn more about your implicit bias, your blind spots, and strategies for being able to help improve the lives of our students of all backgrounds. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Pam. Thank you all for joining us for this next installment in our conversation in our Education to End Hate initiative. Today, we focus on countering Islamophobia. Many of you have joined us as we've embarked on many conversations, including examining what gets taught about Native American students in our state and how do we correct misperceptions. Many of you have joined us in our conversation about countering anti-Semitism, and as we've seen rising acts of hate across school campuses over the course of the many years, we know that it has taken many forms. We appreciate you joining us here today as we continue the conversation. We have seen a dramatic rise in hate over the course of the last few years, and it has culminated in some of the most egregious acts of racism and bias. We've watched the killing of George Floyd and acts of hate literally unfold before our very eyes. And in just the last week, we've watched violent attacks on our nation's capital. We watched white supremacists who would bring more hate to our nation at a time when we are struggling literally for survival in the world, at a time when we must come together. It has been my experience and my belief that when we see these acts of hate, we are not hopeless, but we can do much, much more to support our communities, and that we have one of the most important tools available to us, education, and using education to educate young people so that they don't fall astray, so they don't take up the views of those who would proffer hate when we should be looking for ways to work together. I'm grateful to many, including our friends at ING who we'll hear from today. Thank you, Maha and Ishaq, who will share with us. Thank you to those who've been on our journey, who've talked to us about the experiences of Muslim students, many of whom who've been bullied for their religion, some who've been bullied because of their beliefs, often for practices, a head covering. This is our opportunity to talk about what happens and how do we counter it. I'm grateful to those who've also talked about the places where our education system has misinformed students about Islam in the course of teaching about religion. This is a step for us to change that narrative and to change that path. And so I invite you to join us as we proceed in our conversation about countering Islamophobia in our education system. Thank you all and enjoy today.
Thank you, Superintendent Thurmond and Dan. And Superintendent, thank you for your words and for reminding us about the importance of education, particularly during these times. I want to thank everyone in attendance today for your commitment to learning and unlearning as we continue to push for social and racial justice. And now I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the nature of these webinars, meaning we are all logging in from native lands across California and possibly across all of the US if you're outside of California logging in with us today. I myself am logged in from the lands of the Kickapoo, Jumanos, Wichita, and Tawakoni. Our presenters today will touch on the concept of racialization, and we'll see that racism and racialization is not limited to one group. And the racialization of Indigenous populations continues to impact the way we teach and learn about Native Americans. In the last webinar, my call to action for you was to find out what Native lands you were on by visiting the website native-land.ca, which I'll put in the Zoom chat in a minute. But today, as a part of the land acknowledgement, I want to offer one actionable way you can support your local Native American communities. And that is by evaluating how you are teaching about Native Americans in your classrooms. You can review the first webinar in the CDE Facebook website, where educator Mary Levi and Dr. Nikki Sandoval provided a wonderful resources for us all. And I'll drop that link to the video as well in the Zoom chat. And now on to our presenters. Our speakers come from the Organized Organization Islamic Networks Group, or ING, a peace-building organization providing face-to-face education and engagement opportunities that foster understanding of Muslims and other misunderstood groups to promote harmony among all people. Maha Ilganadi is the founder and Chief Innovation Officer of ING. Maha received an MA in Religious Studies from Stanford University and a BA in Political Science and Economics from the American University in Cairo. She is the author of training handbooks on outreach for American Muslims, as well as training seminars for public institutions on developing cultural competency with the American Muslim community. Our second speaker is Isaac Patan, who is the Bay Area Director of ING. Isaac earned his BA from Hamilton College with a major in anthropology and minors in education and Middle Eastern and Islamic world studies. He has conducted dozens of youth training seminars and spoken to thousands of students on topics relating to Islam and Muslims. We are very, very excited to have Maha and Isaac presenting today on this very crucial topic. And so now I'll hand it off to our presenters.
Thank you so much, Pam. I'm going to go ahead and ask Ishaq to actually run the PowerPoint for me. So thank you for doing that, Ishaq. And I want to begin by thanking Superintendent Tony Thurmond and the California Department of Education for sponsoring this very important series, which previously covered Indigenous peoples and Jewish Americans. And today is hosting the conversation about Islamophobia and its impact, which is a very important and timely topic, as Tony has said, that has concerned Muslim Americans for decades. And I also want to thank Pamela very much and her entire team for their guidance and for all the meetings that we had in their help in putting today's presentation together. So now let's take a look at the outline for today's presentation. We are going to begin by defining Islamophobia and looking at its roots, and then look at its impact on Muslim students. I want to make sure that we all have the same definition that we're working with on this very important topic. We're going to spend the bulk of our time, however, on the topic of how to counter Islamophobia in your schools and classrooms. We're going to go over some important educator tools for countering Islamophobia, beginning with yourself, as well as tips for teaching and other educational resources. And we're going to conclude with suggestions for interacting with Muslim students and families in a culturally sensitive way. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to begin first by defining Islamophobia and examining its roots. Islamophobia is basically defined as anti-Muslim racism, and involves viewing or portraying Muslims, and in some cases promoting Muslims, when we consider the Islamophobia network that are described in studies that have been done on the industry of Islamophobia as follows. they're usually portrayed and promoted as being monolithic and static, meaning that they are all the same and unchanging, as separate and other or different from other Americans or even other people in general, as inferior to the West, as barbaric, irrational, primitive, and sexist, as violent, aggressive people who support terrorism, or as people who are engaged in a clash of civilizations, that they are people that really can't live among us. And more recently, Islam is now seen as a political ideology that is cloaked as a religion, which is very problematic when you consider our First Amendment rights, religious liberties, and the rights that follow from those religious liberties. Let me begin and do a poll. And I want you to tell us when you think Islamophobia started. When do you think Islamophobia started? And we're going to give you a few minutes to respond to that. And I'll be very interested in knowing what the responses look like. So we'll wait for Pamela or the folks behind the scenes who will tell us. Is it post 9/11? Is it after the hostage crisis in Iran in 1979? Is it after the Arab oil embargo in 73? Does it begin with colonialism? Does it begin with the Crusades? When do you think Islamophobia started? This idea of promoting Islam in a particular way. I get a lot of typical answers, and I'll be curious to see if I get those answers here as well from the educators online.
Maha, the poll results are in. 51% of people said with the Crusades, 17 said with colonialism.
Oh, okay. Wow. This is a group of educators. This is wonderful. You're the folks who said that it started with, oh, there you go. Wonderful. Yeah, the folks who said that it started with the Crusades are, that's the correct answer. And colonialism is also a good answer because that's really when it's established. Most of my audiences, and I speak to a lot of audiences from law enforcement to Rotary clubs to houses of worship, they usually think that it begins post 9/11. So thank you. The correct answer is that it begins with the Crusades around the year 1100. We find the images and stereotype of Muslims as infidels, as warring people, promoted as early as the Crusades, which were a series of religious wars supported between the 11th and 13th centuries, which had the objective, of course, of recovering the Holy Land from Muslim rule. This view of Muslims was reinforced again in the 1500s with the beginning of European colonialism, which was a period when a handful of European countries, primarily Britain, France, Spain, and Portugal, colonized most non-European countries or regions, which continued until the 20th century. European colonizers asserted their power over colonized people by defining Europeans as smarter, more capable, and even more human, and describing occupied peoples as backwards, primitive, exotic, and in need of civilizing. And they also cast occupied people as being enemies of Christianity and Western civilization. In the 20th and 21st centuries, we once again see the reinforcement of these negative images of Muslims, as well as the racialization of Muslims, much as other non-whites, African Americans, Latinx and Hispanics, Asians, and so forth, were racialized as barbaric, primitive, sexist, and violent. And so it's not surprising, therefore, that many people have these views after centuries of conditioning long before 9/11, just as they have similar views of other non-white groups. And in fact, the situation is such that I now do Islamophobia in the context of anti-Black racism in the United States. And this trend continues until today, which has now become systemic racism that impacts Muslims in various institutions and in society at large. Systemic Islamophobia against Muslims can be found in all major societal structures, including in education, where textbooks and other resources have often, again, framed Muslims as either antiquated and incompatible with modernity, sexist, oppressive towards women, or as violent terrorists, especially relating to 9/11. Literature, both fiction and nonfiction, generally portray Muslims as backwards and sexist, and there is a plethora of books about the problems with both Islam and Muslims. So critique of Islam and Muslims is one thing. Universalizing terrorism or misogyny as rooted in Islam and not in people and culture is an entirely different issue. It's the difference between saying this person is lazy and saying their culture is lazy, right? The latter implicates everyone belonging to that culture, and the former is specific to the individual. And that's the problem with books like the ones that have been written by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for example. Media coverage of Islam and Muslims generally portray Muslims very negatively. Several studies have been done that have shown that thousands of articles mentioning Muslims or Islam found that 78% are negative, 78%, even when it's not about terrorism. Other studies have shown that news coverage of Muslims is more negative than of other minority groups. Terror attacks by Muslims in the US receive 3.5 times as much media coverage as attacks by non-Muslims. Hollywood movies, representations of Muslims and Arabs in Hollywood have consistently been stereotypical, as in the original Disney's Aladdin, for example. Video games are often based in the Middle East, and games like Prince of Persia reinforce stereotypical representations of Arabs and Muslims. Popular games like Call of Duty do the same thing. They reinforce stereotypes that Muslims are the terrorists or the bad guys. And then we also have Islamophobic campaigns across the country in recent years, particularly after 9/11, that have targeted new mosques and other cultural issues, such as the so-called halal turkeys that are taking over Thanksgiving holidays. And then more recently, of course, in the last 4 years or so, we've seen very biased government policies, such as the Muslim ban, that have targeted Muslims based, again, on a very racialized view of them as all being a security threat. So it's no wonder that many people today internalize these attitudes, since all of these influences lead to the adoption of stereotypes, both good and bad, that can influence one's subconscious and even override their values, as demonstrated by various studies. That means that even if you don't believe you're biased or racist, and I don't know of many people that believe that they're biased or racist, even if you believe that you're not, your subconscious can make you behave in biased or racist ways. And this is especially true in times of fear or stress. I mean, I can share with you personal experiences of people saying things to me that are clearly racist and biased. I don't know them. I'm an American. I don't identify with groups outside of the country, and yet I am always seen as either being an oppressed woman or being someone who is a threat. Or someone to be feared. And this is all obviously very problematic. Now, the impact of Islamophobia on Muslim students and their families, as you might imagine, is going to be obvious. But first, I want you to take a look or to do this poll and tell me which of these people you think is a Muslim. The first one, picture A, of the older gentleman with the beard. The second picture of a woman. The third is of a male. And the fourth is a female with glasses. So which of these do you think is a Muslim? All of them? Some of them? I don't know if you can answer, if you can give more than one answer or not. I suppose you can, if hopefully you can. Which person do you think of these is a Muslim? A, B, C, or D? Will the answer appear, or will you tell me what the answers are, or what people have said about each of these, Pamela? Okay. Okay, wonderful. Wow. This is a really smart group. The correct answer, and the only Muslim in this image, is D, the woman, who is a Latina Muslim. 8% of Muslim Americans are Latinx or Hispanic. The picture C, that person is actually a Christian Arab American. The vast majority of Arab Americans in the country are Christian, about 70 to 80%. The woman next to him, of course, is Hindu, and the first person is Sikh. And this exercise is important because all of these groups, unfortunately, have experienced bigotry based on the mistaken belief that they're Muslim. And in fact, a number of Sikh men have been killed since 9/11, and they continue to be targets of hate crimes today, which is why it's incredibly important to address this issue. Let's go to the next slide, and I want to show you the impact of Islamophobia, as shown by the following polls that you see on the slides. Negative views of Muslims continue to be pervasive in the United States. The most recent poll that we have showed that only 15% of Americans have a favorable view of Islam. 37% have an unfavorable view. Another poll, and we always look at several polls to see if, what the patterns are, and all of the polls that we look at have basically tell us the same thing, that they indicate the same patterns. The 2017 Pew poll found that 41% of Americans believe Islam encourages violence more than other faith. 50% of Americans believe Islam is not part of mainstream American society. And these attitudes, of course, result in anti-Muslim discrimination. I'll share with you more polls. A 2020 poll by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding found that 60% of Muslims report religious discrimination. Now, this is based on reported incidences. I experience bias and discrimination all the time, but someone like me doesn't have time to report it. And so I don't know what the ratio is between the reported and unreported, but even someone like me who's pretty assertive, is able to sort of respond back, experiences it all the time. And as you can see, that it compares, it compares with Jews, but not with Catholics and Protestants. And these numbers show that Muslims are viewed and treated differently than other groups. The poll also found that Muslims are more likely than other groups to experience religious discrimination in institutional settings, at airports, when applying for a job, when interacting with police, when receiving health care. Let's take a look at bullying of Muslim students. Another poll by the same organization found that 51% of Muslim families say their child was bullied for their faith. That's 1 out of 2, double the level of families in the general public, which is about 27%. Keep in mind that when the perpetrator and the victim are in close proximity, reporting is very difficult. Why? Because the victim believes that the perpetrator may hurt them, so then they don't report. So based on reported, it's 1 out of 2, but in some cases I've seen it. I do a lot of youth trainings, and I speak to youth, and when I've asked the questions, 8 out of 10 hands, raised that they've experienced bullying. So I think that the numbers are actually higher than that. I've also been personally involved with anti-bullying efforts at the federal level under President Obama. I was traveling to DC monthly for 5 years, and I worked with Arnie Duncan and helped them do a lot of anti-bullying conferences and workshops that were held at the White House. And in all of the studies that we've looked at then, we saw that bullying is often ignored because adults believe that it's in schools, believe that it's related to First Amendment rights, or that the issue is just not taken very seriously, or maybe the child deserves it because, well, their family or their people were responsible for the terror attacks. Bullying impacts children in our schools right here in California, which is one of the more progressive and tolerant states. According to CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations report about Muslim students in California, which they put out every couple of years, 40% of students report being bullied because they're Muslim. And it comes in the form of verbal bullying, assaults. Girls wearing hijab, like you see me wearing, often have their scarves pulled off. And it has an impact, of course, on them missing schools, and 35% of students report seeing posts containing offensive comments about Islam and Muslims on social media. It's important to note that this bigotry is conveyed even by the adults in schools, as I mentioned earlier, which is particularly troubling due to the power dynamic and the reality that students have little recourse. In fact, students may hesitate to share this even with their parents. And you see the numbers there. I'll just, review the first one. 29%, that's 1 out of 3, report that school staff made derogatory statements about Muslims or Islam, which is quite a bit of people. The impact on Muslim students, persistent bullying and harassment can be significant for a student, and it includes depression, anxiety, sleeping disorders, a very poor school adjustment, and even academic, and we know that bullying affects academic performance as well. Muslim students describe their experiences in their own words in some of these reports. So for example, when a child says, "My teacher stereotyped Muslims and called on me to be expert to explain horrific acts carried out by people in rural places of some Muslim countries I'd never been to." Another one said, "People made fun of my religion and name. I would go home and tell my mom and cry in my room." Another one said, "I heard another student call a Muslim student a terrorist, and it felt scared to portray my own faith." And we find this a lot, where kids don't reveal their religious identity because they're fearful of how other students may treat them or how their teachers may treat them as well. So now let's look at what do we do with all of this? How do we, countering Islamophobia for educators, which we're going to be spending the rest of the time on. And I'm going to address 3 strategies for you. The first step is to begin with yourself by challenging your own assumptions. We will then recommend teaching tips and resources when teaching about Muslims in your classroom. And this study comes up in middle and in high school in various areas. In California, it comes up, the history of Muslims comes up in 7th grade, and then it comes up again in the context of social studies in the Middle East and African studies, and even in the United States, in American history in 8th and 11th grade in a variety of different ways. And so we've created resources that supplement the content standards that are required to be taught. And then we will conclude with ways to apply cultural sensitivity to Muslim students and their families. Let's start with the first one, where we look at how do we counter biases in ourselves. And the best way to do that is learning more about Muslims from authentic and reliable sources. And at ING, we have online curricula that is created specifically for educators, which addresses the following topics in great detail. And you can review this for your own learning on the topic, or you can actually also use it if you teach social studies in middle or in high school. So we have an overview of Muslim Americans and their faith. We have presentations on a history of Muslims in America, which looks at the long history of Muslims in the US, beginning with enslaved Africans and as early as the 15th century. A lot of people don't know that Muslims have actually come to US shores through the enslaved Africans, that it's estimated that up to a third in some cases of the enslaved Africans were Muslims, but a more conservative estimate is 1/5. And then Muslims have been immigrating to the United States since the mid-1800s as well. We have an entire presentation and associated content on Muslim contributions to civilization, which is not taught very well, unfortunately, to look at the many contributions that Muslims make, not only in the math and science and in medicine, but also in literature and in culture and in all other areas. We have a presentation on women in Islam, which addresses stereotypes and misconceptions about the topic, and we look at the current status of Muslim women around the world and in the 50 Muslim majority countries. We have answers to over 150 frequently asked questions, about Islam. If you have specific questions on, Sharia or on any aspect of Islam that you're curious about, we have a book list that we recommend about Muslims, and most of the authors are not Muslim themselves, but that have written books that we think are reasonable. And then, of course, you can sign up on our listserv because we're always releasing new content. And it's also really important to keep abreast of current events and policies relating to Muslims so that you're aware of issues that might impact your Muslim students or issues that might lead to a spike in harassment or bullying, which usually happens, when politicians say disparaging things about Muslims or Islam, or when the United States is involved in wars or in conflict with Muslim majority countries, or when terror attacks happen, or when mosque attacks happen. For example, what happened in New Zealand had a tremendous impact on Muslims here in terms of fire bombings of mosques and hate crimes against Muslims as well. So we will now find out how much you know about Muslims with a question about the global Muslim population. And the poll we're going to put up, and that asks you, how many Muslims do you think are there in the world? How many Muslims do you think are there in the world? Is it 6 million, 1 billion, 2 billion, 500,000, 500,000, or 10 million? I have a feeling that this group is going to answer this question very well, since you've answered the previous ones well as well. 6 million, 1 billion, 2 billion, 500,000, or 10 million. Okay, all right, this is actually spread out. So yeah, the correct answer is 2 billion. And a lot of people are surprised to know that Muslims actually make up 1 out of 4 people in the world. 6 million is about the size of Muslims in the United States. And very good. And some people have estimated that it's actually up to 10 million as well in the United States. But the correct answer is nearly 2 billion, 1.9 billion Muslims worldwide. If we can go to the next slide. And these Muslims live in 50 Muslim majority countries. 50 Muslim majority countries. There are about 190 countries in the world. 50 of them are Muslim majority countries. And that sort of speaks to the diversity of Muslims around the world. Muslims are also huge minorities across the globe in places like China and in Russia, in India, in the United States. And because they live in so many diverse places, they are diverse in their nationality and their race, their languages that they speak, and their culture. And in fact, religion is one factor in the life of a Muslim. Additionally, Muslims, like all other adherents of faith, vary in their practice of faith. Some are nominally religious, while others are moderate and very observant. And that's where we get the diversity. Let's go ahead and test your level of knowledge with the next question. How many Muslim majority countries have had female heads of state? How many Muslim majority countries? We said that there were 50. Of those have had female heads of state. 0, none of them. 1, at least. 5, 9, or 12. This is a little bit of a tougher question. 0, 1, 5, 9, or 12. I can tell you what the majority of Americans would say. But I'm curious what this group would say before I tell you what the right answer is. The rights of women in Islam is one of the most misunderstood topics that we address. So 5, okay. So that's what the majority have said. The correct answer is actually 12. 12 Muslim majority countries have had female heads of states, either presidents or prime ministers. Right? The correct answer is that 14 Muslim women have been heads of 12 Muslim majority countries, and these include some of the largest Muslim majority countries, such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim populated country in the world, Turkey, as well as smaller ones such as Kosovo as well. While people often generalize about Muslim women, they actually live extremely diverse lives depending on a number of factors. The same factors as women, the same factors that impact women worldwide. These include the diversity in treatment of women, as well as factors such as education, profession, socioeconomic status, political situation, all of which impact the lived experience of Muslim women. So the bottom line is, like women everywhere, some Muslim women enjoy rights while others don't, which is a factor of the culture and the place that they live, not due to religion, because religion is just one factor. And in fact, here in the United States, according to studies, Muslim women are the second most well-educated women in the country, right after Jewish women, which is remarkable. Here, they're physicians, they're engineers, they're lawyers, they're academics, and they're also stay-at-home moms, social workers, and are in a variety of professional fields. And before we leave this area, I also want to talk a little bit about extremism. Because there's a lot of misconceptions about terrorism and Islam, and it might really surprise people to know that violent extremism in the United States is mainly committed by far-right extremists, white supremacists, which I don't think surprises people anymore after the events last week in DC against the Capitol. In that sense, it was good that people witnessed it, because people in my field and people that do civil rights work have been talking about these issues for a long time and urging the FBI and law enforcement agencies to make it a priority. And I think everybody now has done that and will do that. According to ADL reports, in 2019, 98% of extremist killings in the US were by far-right extremists, and only 2% were by domestic Islamist extremists. And in the period between 2009 and 2018, right-wing extremists perpetrated 73% of domestic extremist-related killings in the United States. Islamist extremists were 23%, and left-wing extremists were 3.2%. We're now going to turn our attention to educator resources. The second way, the second strategy for countering Islamophobia, for teaching about Muslims and related subjects. And the first area I wanted you to know is that we provide K through 12 educator training, which addresses challenges faced by Muslim students in the current environment. And it provides solutions to those problems, including school policies to provide bullying. And we have lots of ideas that we share in this training. The training also covers guidelines for teaching about religion in general, what the law says about how to do this education about any religion, really. And our organization follows the First Amendment Center guidelines. Dr. Charles Haynes, who is a constitutional legal scholar, who founded that organization, which is part of Freedom Forum, has been our advisor for the last 28 years of our existence. And we incorporate those guidelines and that are consistent with separation of church and state, and how to teach about religion in the context of world history and social studies. And so we provide those tools to teachers, because many teachers actually don't know what these guidelines are. And then we also provide educational sources for teaching this topic. And so I want to also share with you some of the things that we provide. I've already shared with you some of the things that you could benefit from for yourself in learning about these topics. We have presentations and panels and they all supplement content standards, meaning that we know what is required to be taught based on both national standards and California standards as well. And so we've created content that supplements that education. And those are the same topics that I went over with you before. We also provide them for students to come in with a live presenter who's trained on First Amendment Center guidelines on how to do this work. And so that's the kids get a very, a living, breathing sort of Muslim American who is teaching this, and the kids have an opportunity to ask directly, about all sorts of questions. It just brings the topic to life. They have beautiful, we have beautiful slides and then we have a person who actually identifies as a Muslim who can respond to these questions. And some of these are more technical than others because of the grade levels and because of the investment that a teacher makes in some of this. So we tailor this to middle school versus high school versus AP classes versus private schools and how much the teacher is investing in the conversation on these issues. Then we also have panels that supplement, again, content standards. And this is a wonderful program that's been around for 10 years. It's funded by all of the community foundations in the Bay Area. I really credit Haas for the ones who helped us build this out. And these are interreligious, interfaith panels where we have Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu speakers that go out together to supplement these standards free of charge and have a conversation about these topics. Living the faith, what does that mean? Shared values among faith, religion and pluralism. What do each of these religions communities say about these issues, about pluralism, about extremism, about women, peacemaking, separation of church and state? And we have also panels you know, between Muslims and Jews that go out together. We don't talk about, you know, what's happening outside of the country, but we talk about shared concerns that we have around anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, which are cousins, you know, and both communities suffer the most from these forms of bigotries. And we talk about, you know, other issues concerning maintaining our faith in a predominantly Christian society. You know, just shared concerns that we have, and it's a very rich panel, and it's always neat for the kids to see people getting along, and that these people that are associated with these different religious groups are normal, and they get along with each other. They're actually nice, and the kids also learn you know, quite a bit about these topics, because they have to study them, of course, in world history and in social studies as well. The next thing that we also offer is the Intercultural Speakers Bureau, which is really exciting. And again, this is provided free of charge. And what these panels do is that they examine the origins and impact of bigotry in the United States and what we can do about it. So they always end with calls to action. And these panels consist of African Americans, Hispanic, and Latinx, Indigenous, Asian, Muslim, and Jewish, discussing their histories and experiences of bigotry and racism, as well as strategies for countering them. And the reason that we put them all together is because all of these various forms of bigotries are really interconnected and interrelated. And I think that students need to understand that. The second panel that we provide is a panel that supplements lesson plans. So we have 14 lesson plans. They're not online yet. They're about to go online. We're really excited about it. And they're anti-racism, countering racism lesson plans. Again, we provide them for educators free of charge, where the same group of panelists will come in and discuss what we want people to know about us. So in that second panel is part of like lesson plans that a teacher might have might do. And then like, and I think in like day 13 or 12 or whenever the teacher wants us to come in, we'll come in after they've studied all of that history of bigotry. Now we come in and we talk about, you know, what do we want you to know about us, you know, as Muslims, as Jews, as African Americans, as Latinx, you know, and so forth. And so I'm really excited about this. And I thank the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the San Francisco Community Foundation, Haas. I should have not mentioned some of these because Hellman also Foundation, that have all funded this program, and I'm really excited about releasing it. And then we have online curricula supplementing these content standards. So if a teacher doesn't want any of this, no live presenters at all, they have everything online that they can do this themselves. We give them the PowerPoints, we give them the scripts, we even give them, in some cases, a video of somebody delivering these presentations live. And they may not have time to schedule us to come in, and that's fine. And these lesson plans are downloaded in all 50 states. We're even getting requests from Canada, Europe, Asia, Africa. We don't release these outside of the United States because they really supplement content standards here in the United States. And then we, as I mentioned earlier, we have online answers to 150 questions that also students can access. And these are when you look at these, you'll find that they're very academically oriented. There isn't one Islam. There are Muslims, and Muslims interpret things in a variety of different ways. So it's sophisticated in the way that we respond to these questions, and it really depends on a lot of factors in response to these questions, and we're very sensitive to that. So it's not black and white. It's you know, Muslims are diverse, and our responses are also very diverse. And then the last strategy I want you to think about is applying cultural sensitivity towards students and parents. And I'm going to have my colleague do this part because Ishaq, he's the Bay Area director today, but he also ran our youth program, our ING youth program. And he did a lot of these trainings for students and for parents. So I want him to sort of, address the rest of this. Ms. Hawk?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Maha, for the great overview of Islamophobia so far, as well as the first two strategies. And thank you to the California Department of Education, especially for hosting this webinar and other important webinars that are affecting some of our communities disproportionately. So as Maha mentioned, my name is Ishaq Fatah, and I'm the Bay Area Director at ING. In the next section, what we're really going to look at is the ways in which we can apply cultural sensitivity towards Muslims, students, and parents. And so we really like to think of this whole strategy as being holistic. And so the first thing that we want to stress is parent involvement. And parent involvement is really important in academic and social success of children. Some Muslim parents, especially recent immigrants who have limited English fluency, may need a little bit of extra encouragement and outreach to engage with their children's school. And so we encourage you to make an extra effort to encourage parents to attend some of the following events, which will hopefully become normalized once they begin participating. And they include back to school night and open houses at the beginning of the year, parent-teacher conferences towards the middle of the year, and volunteering opportunities in the classroom or school, as well as other social events such as International Night, the Science Fair, and things like that. I've seen a lot of schools in our area provide translation for Arabic speaking parents or Urdu speaking parents especially, which I think is a great idea to promote that message that you really want them there. Moving forward, when it comes to students, there's a few things to keep in mind in terms of their rights. So first of all, students' religious rights are protected by the First Amendment, and they include, for instance, the right to wear religiously mandated clothing, the right to observe dietary rules, and so on. They also include the right to engage in personal worship, so long as it's not disruptive, so not during class time. And that's because of the Equal Access Act of 1984, which affirms the right of students to participate in student-initiated religious activities. And these could include religious clubs, as well as the right to inform others about religion in an appropriate manner, which is usually educational. Additionally, students, their rights include protection from harm, which means physical safety on school premises, as well as safety from emotional stress. And that means that the school responds appropriately when they see or hear about an instance of bullying or harassment, and they respond in a timely fashion. Even if the perpetrator claims it's in jest, it's really important to address certain situations that might come up to make sure that they do not become normalized. Other things that are important to avoid include making fun of or punishing students for wearing the hijab or religious head covering or other religious types of clothing, or forbidding them from doing so in the name of the school uniform and things like that. It's obviously important to avoid making fun of a student's name, country of origin, religion, praising or criticizing one religion over another, or suggesting that a student should convert to another religion for any reason is obviously completely not okay, as well as using biased and inaccurate teaching materials. And so I had touched about this a little bit before when talking about the ways in which Islamophobia is disseminated. But one example would be if you're teaching about 9/11 in elementary schools without other context or background about Muslims, students may grow up with this idea that Muslims are associated with terrorism. Not to mention the fact that teaching about 9/11 in elementary school isn't really that suitable for that age group. Another way is using stereotypical films, such as things like Not Without My Daughter, or fictional books like Shabanu, which not only serve to demonize Muslim, but create an environment where Muslim students are ashamed or even humiliated for their faith. One major way to promote inclusivity in the classroom is to keep in mind a few things relating to Muslim lifestyle and religious practice. The first and probably most prevalent, or one of the most prevalent things, will be diet. So many Muslim students don't eat pork or pork byproducts. And so that's going to include snacks that include gelatin, like marshmallows or Rice Krispie treats or things like that. And so having, vegetarian or non-pork desserts and snacks would be really great. Another is dress. So some Muslim young females will wear a hijab which is a head covering, and they will not take it off in public. And some students who wear hijab are more likely to be targeted for harassment or bullying. One of the studies touched on this idea of 1/3 of Muslim students wearing Muslim female students wearing a hijab have had it uncomfortably tugged or pulled in California. Gender relations is another. So some students may avoid partnering with the opposite gender during a lab assignment or something like that, or acting in a romantic role during a play for the theater. PE, some students may request to be excused from swimming or dancing, or asked to wear sweats under their shorts to practice modesty in their clothing. Prayer, Muslims generally pray 5 times a day, and one of the prayers that falls during the school time is around noon. And so students may ask to pray in an empty classroom or a library or something like that. When I was a student, I didn't know that this was possible, so I just made up my prayers at home. But if I had known, I think it would have been really, really beneficial for me to be able to pray in school. Fasting in Ramadan is another. So, during the month of Ramadan, when Muslims will not eat or drink during the sunlight hours, Muslim students may request to go to lunch, or maybe request to go to the library during lunch, so they don't have to sit around while other students are eating. They may also be requested from rigorous PE activities. And finally, holidays. So the lunar calendar rotates around the year. So it's important to update your calendar every year to kind of see where the Muslim holidays land. This year, Ramadan is going to be in the beginning of April, and it'll end around May 11th. And so students may be absent on, some of these major holidays. And so it's better to not schedule tests or excuse absences. I can't tell you how many students I speak with, they don't take off for these holidays because it's not convenient, because they have too many things to do on that day, which I think is really unfortunate, given that, for some of the other major holidays, schools are just not in session on a whole. We have a 5-year calendar on our website, which I'll reference later in our toolkit, where you can see the major holidays for Muslim students, as well as why they're important. So a major issue, especially relating to Islamophobia, is bullying. And it's really important to create that inclusive environment for all students. And so that includes promoting school-wide activities that encourage tolerance and diversity, one being the Know Your Classmates program, which we partnered with an organization called Beyond Differences on. Another include addressing prejudice and its roots in the classroom or school-wide through discussions and assemblies, giving students the opportunities to share their own experiences with harassment and brainstorm solutions. We do these workshops with students, and one of the things we do is present them with scenarios and enable them to think about how they're going to respond, which gives them that sense of empowerment in terms of being in control of their own situations. It's also good to invite guest speakers to address stereotypes and things like that. It's good to exhibit a sensitivity in classroom discussions about conflict during times of crisis, especially after acts of violences or during a war. Asking a Muslim student to discuss a recent terror attack or a recent attack in Lebanon, I think is not really appropriate. And it's really great to then exhibit extra diligence during those crisis situations. And really monitor the Muslim students. When I was a student and certain things happened, having adults reach out to me and just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. Let us know if anything is, if you experience anything, you can always submit a bias report. Having someone in a position of power and authority do that to me as a student, I think meant a lot. And so for those teachers, I think it does really mean a lot to the student. The next thing is, when bullying does happen, it's really important to address it in a timely manner to really show the message that it's not tolerated and should not be tolerated. The first step is to be aware and recognize the problem. The next step is to adopt a policy that's really enforced, that's laid out properly with clear consequences. The third step is to mediate bullying with all the parties. And if it persists, to involve parents, if need be, especially, is one thing. And then to acknowledge and address personal views of teachers and staff on current events or issues. And so if there are teachers or staff members that are propagating messages that that encourage these attitudes, that is something that should be addressed. And finally, to hold staff sensitivity or cultural diversity workshops that help to address stereotypes or misconceptions, so that everyone is aware, how to move forward in the best way possible. One of the last things I want to focus on is just our toolkit. So several resources have been referenced throughout this entire webinar, and you can find all of them in one place on the Educator Toolkit. There are sections for administrators, there are sections for educators and teachers, and there are sections for parents. And so you should be able to find everything you need there, and you can always contact us as well. And so I do want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we do hope that it was useful. We hope that together we're going to be able to create a classroom and a school environment for all of our diverse students in California. And it's really wonderful that this webinar on Islamophobia is just one of many by the California Department of Education, that focuses on a lot of different groups. And so I'm going to pass it back to Pamela, who's going to lead our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Maha and Isaac, for that wonderful presentation. We're now going to launch into Q&A. So I'll give a few minutes for folks down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a Q&A box that you can type into, and we'll just give a minute. Actually, one question did come in about if you can recommend books for an adult anti-racist book club. Let me read that question. So yeah, book recommendations for an anti-racist book club. There we go.
There have been, can you hear me fine? Yep. There have been a lot of organizations that have put out some incredible book lists, anti-racism book lists. I would not want to, make a recommendation here, but I think that if you were to Google anti-racism book list, I think that you would find plenty that of just really incredible books. I can tell you that one of the books that we read as a team that really had an influence on me is the book by what was it called?
White Fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo.
Yeah, White Fragility by DiAngelo.
Robin DiAngelo.
Robin DiAngelo, who has written a couple of books on this issue and has great videos online that you can also watch if you don't have time to actually read her book. But I thought it was really impactful for me because we can all improve in this area, and I benefited immensely from her book. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I was actually getting up to retrieve. I have that book, so
yeah.
Did you read it? So I'll grab it in a second. It's right behind me. And I have a couple of other book recommendations too, such as We Want to Do More Than Survive by Dr. Bettina Love. And I'm gonna grab and put the list in and show in a minute. Let's move on to another question. We have, what are your suggestions for early childhood teachers and resources?
I personally don't have experience in this area, so I couldn't tell you. This area is not part of our core competency. We mainly work with middle and high schools. We've done work for elementary school educators, but it's around the same things that we presented. So I don't have I couldn't offer anything there.
Thank you, Maha. And I would say for those looking for suggestions regarding teaching resources, perhaps that's a good avenue to start a conversation with you and Isaac, and maybe that's something IMG and the instructors who are interested can work on.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. We've been asked about this from Muslim parents, actually. The demand is so great, as you might imagine, for the work that we do. We don't even do a lot of marketing, and we get a lot of requests to speak, which is partly how we moved online to make this content available to teachers directly because of the demand for it. So yeah, no, I would love to get into this area. It's just a question of resources, and time. But if there's anyone online that has resources already on the communities that we work with, on the populations that we're invested in, that we work on, please get a hold of us. Yeah, I mean, if it's we can take a look at what you have and potentially use it. Mm-hmm.
And for that, if you email the ed to end hate email address, and I'll put that in the chat box in a moment, for those who have resources, I'd be happy to connect you with our speakers here today. So for another question, again, about text recommendations, I think just more in general, are there any text recommendations or a place to see evaluation of such texts? I think this is speaking to what Ishaq was mentioning about some textbooks that are biased against Muslims.
I am wondering, so this, the organization that I'm thinking of that did a lot of evaluations of textbooks is no longer in operation, but there is an organization in Washington. I'm thinking of Susan Douglas's organization, Ishaq.
Yes, the Center for American Islamic Studies at Georgetown University.
Yeah. I would look for Susan Douglas, who is affiliated with them. And she used to work for an organization called the Council on Islamic Education that did really great work on evaluating textbooks, and have really contributed to better content on Muslims and Islam in these textbooks. But I don't think that they're in existence anymore. But so Susan Douglas is somebody who's actually done that work herself for this organization, who's now in is it Georgetown University?
Yes, Georgetown University.
Yeah. If that person wants to write to me, I could potentially connect them with her. And she would be, we don't really get involved in textbook work at all. Mm-hmm.
And yes, I've placed the email in the chat, so do feel free to reach out and I'll get you all connected.
Yeah, there are a lot of textbooks that teachers use and that schools use. And that's another entire field of specialization that you need to have to be able to look at all of these textbooks and evaluate which one is best. Yeah.
Another question is about recommendations for parents that refuse, so how to deal with parents, I suppose, that refuse to have their children participate in any education lessons that involve Islamic studies.
Yeah, there's not much you can really do other than to tell them that this is part of the content standards. It's required education nationally in all 50 states. They have to learn about different people and religions associated with those, with these people, in addition to learning about Christianity and Judaism, which they do in 6th grade. They have to learn about other religions as well, and it's all done in the context of world history and social studies, and I'm sure the teacher knows what they're doing and how to do this work. But there's not much you can really do. Parents have a lot of, have a lot of authority. You could, if it's dealing with with the study of Islam in particular and Muslims, you could guide them to our website and have them take a look directly at our content, our answers to questions, how we present, getting to know Muslim Americans and their faith, the kind of work that we do, and maybe they'll be more comfortable with us coming into the classroom or for the teacher using our material. And we don't just do work on Muslims and Islam. As I said, we do it in the context of religious pluralism in the United States. We do it in the context of intercultural studies. And so, we're out there with other groups. A teacher might also consider instead of just having a Muslim speaker, is having a Muslim, Christian, Jewish speaker come out together, Muslim, Buddhist speaker come out together, depending on what it is that they're studying and what area they're focused on. So we have all of that flexibility. But parents have a lot of authority, over their children, and there's not much you can do except maybe have them take a look at our website. Maybe they'll be more comfortable with that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, Maha. And then lots of questions about recommendations on the book. So I think we've already kind of covered that.
Well, just general books, because we actually list a bunch of books that we recommend for reading, for just personal education about Islam and Muslims, about Muslim history, about women in Islam, and so forth. We actually provide a link. Do anyone use Hawk?
Yep, and I'm going to add it to the chat as well right now.
Mm-hmm. It's /book-list, ing.org/book-list. And most of these authors are not Muslim authors. Some are, I noticed. Sumbul Al-Karameli is wonderful. Her books are wonderful. I know that a lot of people read her books in book clubs, and she lives in Palo Alto, and she's actually a speaker as well. And I noticed that we have both of her books up under Islam. So I would, Karen Armstrong's books are wonderful. Ben Daniel is one of the priests here locally as well, and he's written, and I'm actually in his book, which is kind of neat. And then we have a lot of books by John Esposito, who's in Washington, part of Georgetown, Joseph Lombard, and others. So yeah, we have some really good books on here. So I would check that one out.
Thank you for that resource. And then speaking of your resources, do you have anything in the Spanish language?
No, we should. Oh my goodness. How did we miss that? We should, and we will. We will. We went through, did a lot of work, a lot of updating to make sure that we were inclusive as much as possible in the work that we do, and we should be inclusive in the books that we provide in different languages. So I'll make sure that we do that. No, not currently. I'm embarrassed to say.
Well, and that's the wonderful thing about these webinars, is not only are we putting out information, but we're also learning.
Yeah.
Comments that they make. And speaking of learning, that's a great segue to, there was a comment in the Q&A earlier, and I don't want to not make note of it, although I have to say I'm not sure about the statistic, but an attendee did mention that, I guess it was said earlier, a statistic about most educated group of folks in the US.
Yes.
And the African-American women are actually the most educated group of women in the US. Now, I obviously, being in this webinar, I don't have time to go confirm that statistic.
No, you know what? I mean, listen, if you do a lot of work like we do on reading polls and surveys, not all of them are accurate. Not all of them are accurate. We know that, right? We know with the elections, right? that these polls and surveys are not always accurate. I wouldn't be surprised if at all if that were true. I know that Indian American women also have said the same thing. So I was actually citing one poll. This is not one of those statistics that I've seen in many different places, but when I did see it, I latched onto it. But I apologize. Yes, different polls have different information. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. I mean, and that's gonna make me not want to mention that statistic again without really checking to see if it's if it's mentioned elsewhere. Not in that one poll.
Well, yeah. There's a wonderful book, and the name escapes me right now, that I read a while back about how data can be manipulated, and it depends on what questions we ask. But I definitely wanted to make mention of that. And
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the person who mentioned it, because this is exactly why we look for patterns. We look for patterns and we look at several polls. We don't just use polls for, in this particular one, that was my mistake, because I only saw that in one poll. Yeah, but it is good practice to only mention numbers where you see a pattern by looking at several surveys and polls. And this is actually good for educators as well. Just I'm sure that they know this information already, but yeah, thank you for pointing it out, whoever did, and thank you, Pam, for bringing it up.
of course, and I think the questions are kind of starting to wrap up now. So we have one last kind of comment. They're saying thank you to you both for your presentations. And then they're wondering, do you think that our focus on building strong families is a good place for people of various faith where various faith communities can come together for a common goal to build our country, since there are so many factors and factions hell-bent on breaking down this institution? Yeah. Is there good common ground here?
Absolutely. That's a great access point to get people to come together on this idea of building peaceful families, peaceful communities, or healthy families, peaceful communities. I think that's a great idea. I'm looking forward to seeing what President-elect Biden is going to do, and I'm really eager to work with him. We have a program called Know Your Neighbor, and we have been working with his transition team to say, hey, President Obama had embraced that program. He only did it though in his last year in office, and we're really working hard to get the attention of President Biden and Kamala Harris to basically adopt this program so that we can do that kind of work at the grassroots level all across the country. We have partners across religions and across racial groups all across the country that we work with in the Know Your Neighbor program. And we want to get people together. And I am really convinced and very hopeful that if we can get the pro-Trump and pro-Democrat, people together just to talk to each other, to learn about each other. If they differ on issues of race, or if they differ whatever issues that we can address, if we can just get people together to talk to each other, I'm very hopeful that we can overcome this polarization that our nation is facing right now. I'm just really hoping that Biden will fulfill his promise of when he says that I'm a president for all Americans, not just for the people that voted for me. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. And I just wanted to note that as we're talking about finding common ground, and in this comment about building strong families, to recognize that families are also diverse, and our definition of a nuclear family may not only be, mom, dad, and kids, right? The diversity and the uniqueness of the family is ever changing, and we're learning so much about that as well.
Exactly. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it looks like the rest of the comments are just compliments, great information, great conversation. They're thanking you for being brilliant, humble, and approachable. Those are their words. And I do want to say that Maha, you modeled for us just right now something that is so critical to this equity and anti-racist work, which is, as you said in the beginning, self-examination and being willing to take feedback. And you did that so elegantly with the comment about the statistic that might be
I'm sorry.
That needs to be pointed out, because in doing this work, we ourselves need to be self-examining, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Pamela. And thank you I love your team, and I love the department as you've built it out. And I'm looking forward to continuing in this work and learning with everyone.
Thank you. So with that, let me say thank you again to both you and Isak for this wonderful presentation. And again, I am reminded that one of the things that really struck me in your presentation is that we really have to start with ourselves in analyzing our internalized racism and unconscious and implicit biases. And one of the ways to do that, I think, is to have good people around us who will be willing to point it out, and us being receptive to that feedback, as you just demonstrated for us. I don't want to close without addressing the first question, because I did try to get up and get the books. I listed the books. You mentioned White Fragility, so I've got that here, and this is in background. But I've also got two books that I thought were fascinating if you're interested in a deeper dive, which is The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap, which I found fascinating. It gets into data and statistics, and then The Color of Law. And then there was also Me and White Supremacy, and I believe How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi are also wonderful books to start with, guys. So it's great. And then I just want to say that I'm also reminded through your presentation not to make sweeping generalizations about specific groups. And that, it's not only extremists, but we have to do some self-examination of the beliefs that we uphold that might be perpetuating racist ideologies and racist systems.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in closing, I just want to reiterate what Superintendent Thurmond stated in the beginning, that this work has been and continues to be critical. And January 6th was an indication of that. I've learned so much from these webinars, and I continue to learn. And we know that it is so important to educate our youth and to educate the population, because as we learn more, we're able to identify things and recognize things. Like, for example, during the events of January 6th, I saw images in the news with various flags and shirts that folks were wearing that were anti-Semitic images that I would not have known if it were not for the lexicon that the Museum of Tolerance had provided us. So it was definitely eye-opening as to how deep the hatred really runs. So with that, I want to thank the technology and communications team for all of their hard work in putting this event together and being in the background and making sure everything's running smoothly and cameras are on and mics are on. Again, I want to thank you, Maha and Isak, for your presentation and for all the hard work you've put into this. I know you were working late into the night making adjustments to make it perfect. Do you have any closing remarks for us?
Keep up the good work. I look forward to seeing future webinars by your team, and we look forward to working with you as well, continuing the work together. This is hard work. This is not easy work. But with everything that's happened in the country, there's always a silver lining to it, and the silver lining is that we're able to address these issues when they come up, and that's the value of all of that, is that we're able to address these issues, and that's a good thing. So
I also just want to thank all of the attendees, the educators, and everyone associated with schools for taking time after school. Your days are incredibly long. And so we appreciate you putting in this extra effort and energy to learn more about how to, what's important about Islamophobia and what are the best things we can do to counter it together.
Thank you. That's beautiful talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Sak. Yes, we know our educators are so dedicated. And with that, I'm going to send out one last thing in the chat for those of us on Zoom, which is a Google form for us to gather your feedback. Please provide your honest and anonymous feedback as we continue to improve and make adjustments to these webinars. And that concludes today's programming. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.